Hello, welcome back. I think, Joe, you can take over now to compile these two contributions from these two breakout rooms.
Yep. So we'll just give people a minute to come back to the main stage, and if we can pull up our panelists, if Tristram and Sharon can help pull our panelists and our rapporteurs to the stage. And we'll give a chance for the audience to get here as well. We coalesced around two rooms, and it was actually really interesting having multiple panelists in each room and hearing the intersections between their fields. So the discussion's really interesting. If we want to have if there are two rapporteurs, if you kind of turn on your mic and your video and identify yourself, I'll pull you up to the main stage. And maybe we can start with Viola. Are you happy to start? Good on you. Go for it. I mean, it's quite a broad conversation to be summarised and bring together. But if you say a few points, then the panelists can chip in, and we'll just go for 5 minutes, and then we'll hear about the other table.
Yep, of course, no problem. So yeah, as you said, we had a very sort of wide-reaching discussion. It's clear that this is a really interdisciplinary area, which is great, but also means that it's quite hard to identify sort of exact points of collaboration when there's so much sort of feeding back into itself. But we discussed considering the whole system, how it was an interdisciplinary matter in academia, and also that there are multiple stakeholders out of academia, obviously, involved, which shape what actions one might take within their research. So Emily Flashman's work is a good example of this. She's working on flood-resistant crops and engineering enzymes that sense a lack of oxygen and trigger a flood-resistant response. And mentioned that it's kind of hard to know which plant to focus on. Do you breed certain characteristics to target certain vulnerabilities, or do you look at the sort of top choice for consumers? So do you shape consumption, or does consumption shape your research? And also at what time frames? Hard to know what technology we'll be using in the future, whether to use conditions now or predict conditions. So Nicola also mentioned an interesting intersection with financial markets and agricultural shocks and the implications of that, and how you can look at that through mapping the value chain of agriculture, which banks are providing support, and how does that link to insurance markets. And everyone acknowledged that it's difficult to have conversations about resilience when you don't know exactly what you're trying to be resilient against, from whose perspective, and over what time period. But it did seem like there could be a potential collaboration between sort of those who work on weather systems and forecasting, and also discussing what time frame we want to work in, what technologies we want to use. So, for example, Nicola mentioned how early forecasts have been really useful for humanitarian action. So even though there is uncertainty, certain models can be good enough and the intervention can be low cost enough, but overall there's a good impact. So she spoke about how seasonal forecasts on cholera models and cholera models had been useful, knowing when to send in soap to a region. And though this might be something that is, there are obviously uncertainties, you can still produce good results. So the kind of main point of potential collaboration we happened upon was looking at the distribution of things we might want to be resistant to, and then targeting that. So I definitely missed lots there if anyone wants to jump in. It was a really complex conversation, but it was really interesting.
Well, you did very well.
Thanks.
Shall we get Jane to come and talk about the other room, and then we'll see if there's any kind of final comments?
Yes, so we had an interesting group of people in the room.
We had somebody from Vietnam, the MSD lead in sustainable healthcare. Miles was leading, and Andrew Farlow, who's head of the Oxford and Berlin Global Health Initiatives, and others too. We talked a bit about what Oxford is doing in the area, and that there was some activity around health impacts of climate change, but it was rather patchy, and kind of there was a view that medical sciences had a lot to offer, and sort of looking to medical sciences to sort of lead on this, with particularly with the welcome strategy in mind, new strategy in mind, that global heating is one of their main strategic themes, and we were sort of a lot of the discussion focused around sort of how we might that might be a driver in what we do, obviously with the pump priming fund that is being made available at the moment through MSD. So we talked a little bit about Berlin, activities in Oxford and Berlin, and there are a lot of activities going on in Berlin itself, the Potsdam Institute for Climate Research, the Koch Institute, a new natural history museum being developed, and in particular kind of bringing science, bringing people in to understand more about science, to engage more with science, and that this was actually an important part of climate change, impact climate change on health, sort of how people are engaged with the issue, what their views are, how they see they can, how they understand policies, how this affects their behaviour. We talked about that. We were talking about obviously the strengths that we have with the centres based in Southeast Asia and elsewhere. So those are welcome centres, and of course that is a way into understanding what the issues are in the countries that are going to be affected large numbers of people, particularly major impacts. So, and we felt that we wanted to engage. It was really important to engage with those people, whether we do it through the units or through collaborations that some of the group already have in India or Southeast Asia. What else we talk about? I think we felt that sort of going back to this idea, feeling like one of the gaps was that maybe it's something which we could address, perhaps through the pump priming, and then leading on to something more substantial to build some sort of activity in this area, is around how the public behaves and reacts to climate change at an individual level, but also how they react to policy changes. And places like India, this would be particularly important. And we, as I said, we wanted the people in those areas, we wanted the lead to be sort of in those areas where in Asia, Southeast Asia or India, and sort of trying to identify who those people might be, how we might go about building up this area, and also talking about how Oxford Berlin might develop the area to contribute, and that was something that Andrew talked about. So I think we recognise that the pump priming initiative timing is not great because of COP26. Whilst the funds have to be started by a certain period of time, we may not be in a position to apply for the funding, but felt that the area of sort of public perception, looking at how people behave individually and respond to policy in Southeast Asia, India, would be an area that where there was a need to develop activity.
Thank you, Jane. I'm going to let Nevin close, and I'm going to put up a final slide just to remind you of kind of things you can do next.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for finding a time to join us and participate in these interesting discussions. This was not imagined as some sort of a putting up the final word of what is the state of understanding, but actually to initiate the further discussion, further planning of the papers, report, projects, and so on. So in that sense, we are hoping that this was interesting for you and that you will follow up on the discussions. We will share the contact information if particular participants agrees to that with everybody, and that can be a seed of a further work, because I'm sure that we touch upon many interesting things that needs to be addressed. And keep in mind, if you're thinking about potential funding projects, that the calls, like Jim would like to point out, that the funding calls appear suddenly and the window is relatively short. So the earlier we start thinking about multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary project amongst ourselves, it will be more beneficial for the future activities.
Thank you,
All right.
everyone.
Thank you all. Have a
Bye.
good day.
Bye for now.
Bye.
Well done, Nevin, for organising this.
Yes,
Thank
indeed.
you, Miles.
Yep.